the American poet and playwright Mercy Otis Warren, 1728 to 1814, was a leading female figure in the independence movement. She wrote political propaganda and satire, and her life and career were remarkable, largely because of her fearless willingness to engage in political dialogue at a time when women, especially in Puritan Massachusetts, yielded to men in civic matters. Her father was elected to the Massachusetts legislature in 1745, and politics became part of her home life. Self-educated through reading and a private tutor, she married James Warren, a Harvard graduate who was also elected later to the Massachusetts legislature in 1766, and her home in Plymouth became a literal hive of anti-British activity. Mercy Otis Warren had a lifelong friendship with John Adams and Abigail Adams. John Adams called her the most accomplished woman in America. A talented poet at the time when poetry was at the center of political writing and persuasion in pamphlets, broadsides, and newspapers. Mercy Otis Warren excelled at short dramatic sketches which were published in patriot newspapers, and they were disguised in an ingenious way in which they would appear as part of advertisements for entertainment. The quote-unquote advertisement would appear in such patriot newspapers as the Massachusetts Spy, and the reader would soon be able to discern from reading this excerpt of an imaginary play that it was indeed a satiric commentary on their British rulers. Sandra J. Sarkala notes that, quote, these distinctive rhetorical texts are best understood and appreciated if read within the context of the newspaper publication, and were more propaganda than art. What's remarkable about these sketches were that they were totally in the context of the issues being discussed, the most recent current events being discussed in the newspapers. Warren's first foray into this type of propaganda began in 1772 with two sketches in the Massachusetts Spy called The Adulator, discussing the aftermath of the Boston Massacre. It was followed by two more in 1773 called The Defeat in the Boston Gazette. By the end of her career as a polemicist, Warren's work was being published in Boston, Philadelphia, and New York City simultaneously. Her sketches came at a point in the independence movement when support had reached a plateau. By 1772, the Townshend Revenue Acts were largely repealed except for the tea tax, and the appointment of the royal governor, Thomas Hutchinson, seemed to quell the unrest following the Boston Massacre. As Britain attempted to quietly push for the Massachusetts royal governor and judges to be paid by the crown rather than the colonists' assemblies, Warren described them as the onset of tyranny. In another case, she criticized the freedom of Ebenezer Richardson, found guilty of manslaughter for the killing of an 11-year-old that began the events culminating in the Boston Massacre. When the judge refused to sentence Richardson, he walked free. The Adulator advertisement was distributed with a broadside entitled "Together with a Few Lines on the Enlargement of Ebenezer Richardson, Convicted of Murder." It remarks about his travels as an infamous murderer who would come soon to Boston. Using apocalyptic imagery and language, she evokes the battle between Christ and Antichrist, asking the Almighty to, quote, mark the movements of this netherworld and bring them account, crush these vipers who, singled out by a community to guard their rights, shall for grasp of ore or paltry office sell them to the foe. End quote. Warren portrayed those colonists who quietly accepted the intrusions of Hutchinson and the British as corrupted sellouts who were deserving of the wrath of God himself. The courage and clarity of Mercy Otis Warren's writing and messages indicate how uncompromising and courageous our founding fathers and mothers were in fighting complacency and corruption, and reminds us how much we need to have such courage and integrity today. Thank you.